God and faithful teaching. And as we come to Joshua, this is the renewing of the covenant, right? And as Moses walked through the Red Sea through deliverance, Joshua was going to walk through the Jordan River in inheritance. And as God took back the Red Sea, he's going to hold back the river. And you might say, well, the Red Sea, that'd be a greater miracle, wasn't it? Have you ever tried to stop a current? It doesn't work. And we went up to Eagle Point and showing the kids some different things, some hangouts, and we were looking by the castle over the river, and I said, you get an idea of how big the river is when you're standing up there by the castle, or not on the castle, but out in the front you're looking, and it just, it's big, but you get an idea of big when you see this little thing about this big, and it's a boat, and it's in the middle of that area, and it looks so tiny, and it's just all you can really see is the water kicking up from the engine, and you get an idea of how big that is, and so Lily was asking me, she's like, Dad, can you kayak across that? I'm like, you really don't want to kayak across, because I was telling her about the current. If you start here and you're kayaking across, you're going to end up down over here. I said, so the great thing is if you want to kayak or get in a tube, it's just let the current take you down the river. And when you come, and I was showing them the spillway where I used to fish, where I used to grow up, and sharing a little bit of my life with them and what was important. And really talking about the inheritance of my spiritual life. Not really realizing it at the time, but the inheritance of my spiritual life. And then asking myself, what am I passing down to my children? What am I leaving them as an inheritance in the Lord? And sometimes in pastoral ministry and with pastors, a lot of what you see is the inheritance that the children get is the frustration from being in ministry, not necessarily the joy. I remember, and sometimes there's always this thing about pastors' kids, right? And most of that is because they live under a glass where people watch them and have expectations that they don't expect for their own children. And so it's harder for a pastor, now I'm not talking about mine, but I'm talking about a lot of times in other pastors' kids, they can't live up to the expectations that are on their fathers and mothers, but they're expected to. And so what happens? They fail. And when they fail, their failure is much bigger than of somebody else, and it's harder to come back from because there's always an asterisk by them. And so just the true things of life. When you're in ministry or whatever, and the eyes are not just on you, the eyes are on your family. And so that's why a lot of the Nazarene pastors that were at our church, their kids, as I was growing up, drug addicts. So I remember when my dad was with the newest pastor of the 80s, Reverend Schmidt was his name, and they were going into the parsonage, and the parsonage was beautiful. It's on Craigmore Drive, right by Eagle Point. There's Eagle Point and that Craig, beautiful houses there. And the parsonage was beautiful. It's like the first or second house built on that block. And so going through there, and the previous pastor, they're all gone, so names don't matter to you, Suman, which actually his first wife, who was the pastor's wife at our church, ended up taking her life after they left. And then his kids, I think, the pastor before him, kids were drug addicts. His were struggling. But anyway, Reverend Schmidt came. He didn't have any kids that were with him at that time. And so they were going down and found this massive bunch of marijuana in bags down in the basement. And Reverend Schmidt's called my dad, because my dad was a go-to guy at the Nazarene Church. And he said, what do I do with it? My dad came over what do we do with it? Shall we burn it? My dad goes, no, don't burn it. Don't do that. Let's just throw it away. But the innocence, right? Let's burn it. Send it to hell. Well, there could be an after effect. Let's just, send it to the wind or put it in the trash. And so I look at that and I'm like, I don't judge the pastors, but I'm like, man, I'm hoping that those kids, because those pastors were faithful to the congregation that they served, and I can't say anything about the type of father that they were. I don't know. Because like I said, most of those kids were a lot older than I was walking around. And so I looked at that and I'm like, God, I hope that somewhere down the line that they got the spiritual inheritance that was due them from their mom and their dad. I get that kids sometimes walk away and rebel. I get that. And in the church, there's a high probability of kids who are born in church that walk away from their faith later on in life. I don't like that. And it's not just one reason or one excuse. Some of that can be that we were raising kids and maybe we should have been more intentional. Yeah, I got that. Some of that can be, maybe they're just rebellious and they never churned their heart. That can happen. No matter how well you're trying to raise them, they've just got a hard heart. And the only thing that God can do is break that hard heart. And so that's what you pray for. And you hope that it happens and you continue faith. And some do just fine. But I began to look at this as they're crossing over. And the Lord said, I'm going to renew the covenant with Joshua. This is in 3 and 4. And again, he's saying these familiar things. As I was Moses, so I'm going to be with you. And so there's a spiritual inheritance a transfer that's coming from Moses, because Moses doesn't get to go to the promised land. Now, listen, there was a whole generation that didn't get to the promised land. Did you know that? Moses didn't get to the promised land, but I don't think they ended up in the same place. Because what God said of that generation is that they will never enter my rest. But Moses, we know, entered God's rest, although he never entered the promised land. You say, Steve, how do we know exactly? How do we know that? Because on the Mount of Transfiguration where Jesus is, there's Moses and Elijah. So Moses entered the rest of the Lord. As a matter of fact, nobody got to bury Moses but God. And there's a reason, I believe, for that, is so that God's not big into tombs being worshipped where there are dead people in it. He's okay for you going to an empty tomb. And so there's never going to be this place where you can say, hey, this is the place where Moses the Great, God took care of that. Because the focus is really about an empty grave, about the one who had victory over death. And so we know that Moses entered his rest. I don't know about the children who ran around in the desert that rebelled so much against God that God had finally said enough. That God he was done with it because of the hard-heartedness of them. But yet there's a spiritual transformation between the leadership of Moses and the leadership of Joshua. And as we talked about before, that God is reigniting this. I think Joshua's my man. I'm doing things through him, and he's going to exalt him and all this. And so, the ark is going to hit the water, and the priests are going to hit the water, and the current is going to be stopped all the way back here, and the water's going to build up all the way in the back. And listen, the water was overflowing its banks during that season anyway. So he picked the heaviest and thickest. Anybody alive when in the flood of 65 around? Yeah, there's a few of you, right? Yeah. That flood, and I've seen the pictures, right, have it going all through downtown because we didn't have a dike back then. And my dad said many of the cities up and down Iowa laughed at us because we built a dike. They didn't laugh at the next flood, right? And so that water, when it gets out of its bank, that current is treacherous. There are people that die in that current. In the Mississippi because they don't respect it or they don't know what it actually can do. I had a professional diver tell me one time, he was married to one of my other cousins, and he said, you live on the Mississippi? I said, yeah. He goes, do you swim in it? I'm like, well, once in a while. He's like, there are undercurrents, there are undertows in that water, he said. He goes, and if you're swimming and you get dragged down, he's like, do not fight the current. He said, because it's going to drag you for a little bit. But if you hold your breath at some point and relax, it's going to shoot you straight back up again. I'm like, okay. He's like, don't fight the current. And I was like, okay. And so the current is a powerful force. But it's not more powerful than the Lord in whom we serve. And there is two currents in the world today. I don't know if you knew that. There is the world's current that many Christians get swept up in. And they're not able to fight against the things. As a matter of fact, they go with the way of the world. And then there's the current of the Lord, and we're taken on the Lord's path or whatever, and we're swept up in that, which is a good thing. But the current of the Mississippi River is not, or the Jordan River is not more powerful than the Lord in whom we serve. And so he does this dynamic miracle of where he stops it. And I believe there's like a buildup. Water is building up, and he's like, you can build up, but you ain't going any further. And then he says, and this is happening as the priests are hitting that water. And again, as the Red Sea, they process through dry ground. Here in the Jordan River, it's the same thing. They're going to walk on dry ground. Now, this is a big river. Imagine the Mississippi, right? And we're putting the ark in the water, and God's going to pull it off. There's no dam. It's not lock and dam, right? There's no guy saying, hey, shut off the water. No, it's none of that kind of stuff. It's God stopping the water with his hand. And not only that, and it's not like, okay, we're going to wait 30 days for the ground to dry. So there's a miracle of the stopping of the water, and there's a miracle of underneath this thick river, heavy river with a current and a lot of sediment and a lot of mud and a lot of everything, there's dry ground that they're walking upon. Means you're not going to slip. And they're going to go to the other side. And so what the instructions that God gives Joshua is like, listen, take 12 men, one of each tribe, and then I want you to grab 12 stones from the river, not like on the side. 12 stones that are in the bed. So you're going to grab those stones, you're going to take them, and you're going to set them up where you're going to camp tonight. And then what you're going to do is after, and there's a whole lot of backstory here, but after this, they're going to go to Gilgal, which is by Jericho, and they're going to set up those stones in Gilgal. Now, Gilgal is interesting because Gilgal is where you would have a school of prophets later on down the road that Elijah would visit. And so Gilgal is kind of like this a good city where prophets are coming out of and school of prophets and all this, but it goes bad, like the story of Israel does. And so at Gilgal, they're setting up, and so the reason they're setting up these stones is as a memorial and a testimony of the faithfulness of God along the journey. Because I don't know about you, but it is very easy for me to forget the goodness of God and what he's done for me in my life because of the next thing I may be facing. But the memorial stones that are erected are always a reminder of his faithfulness in the hard times that I had back here and what he will continue to do in the hard times I may be facing coming ahead. The memorial that I had... Now listen, there's a difference between a memorial stone and an altar. The altar is a place of sacrifice. The more life, and allow the Lord to take us.